You're listening to 5 Things with Lisa Birnbach.
Hi, I'm Lisa Birnbach. This is 5 Things That Make Life Better. And this is our last podcast of the year and of the decade. My gosh, it's the end of the teens. Somehow, I feel lucky to be alive. I don't feel lucky every day, by the way, not by a long shot, but I know inside, I know I'm lucky. I don't think we can choose luck. I think if we study ourselves, if we're a little bit intuitive or introspective, we will find that, we're mostly pretty fortunate. Trust me, though, there have been many times I've sobbed, why me, when the accumulation of hurts and woes and slights and health things get just overwhelming. Just a couple of days ago, I was thoroughly insulted by a really nasty postal worker for really no good reason. And I felt myself almost using that as an excuse to get low. But I stopped. The day didn't have to be ruined. I couldn't let it. And we cannot let it. And the holidays, there's so much pressure to fill every moment with joy and ecstasy. And, it's expectations that society and Hallmark and Christmas specials and cars with big red bows on them that we see in every commercial, and we feel like we're not up to it. But take a little time, recalibrate, maybe even take a walk by yourself and be good to yourself. This has been a strange year, and this end of the year is hard for a lot of people, especially those without families. So I'm thinking of them. Here is my last list of things that made my life better in 2019. Number 1, beef stew in the pressure cooker. I did it. I do not speak the language of Instapot, and I had moments of tremendous fear, but I allowed myself to give in to the pot, and it cooked for 35 minutes in high pressure, then somehow in less pressure for 10 minutes, and then it was done. And of course, I only had one pan or pot to clean, and the stew was good. Now, I have a lot to learn. I have to approach this big thing on my kitchen counter without fear, but I'm telling you this now so that I will hold myself to it. You're my witnesses. I'm going to try lamb stew next, and I will report back. Number 2, Amuses Bouches. Now, this is a fancy French term for the free hors d'oeuvre that some restaurants offer before a meal. Amuse bouche means something to amuse your mouth. I want to say here and now that I have never had an amuse bouche I didn't like. I'm sure most of us have not had one that we didn't like, because it's a moment for the chef to show off and make something tiny and perfect that will whet our appetites and make us order the most expensive thing on the menu. It works! Also, doesn't free food just always taste better? It does. Number 3, pockets in my clothes. How I love them. A dress or skirt with pockets is so dreamy. It's such a gift, because you have a place for your Kleenex or your coat check or your lipstick, or just a place for your hands that may not know where to go all the time. I know I'm not alone in this. I know that when women find that something they bought, particularly not jeans, but which always have pockets, but something else has pockets, it's like a gift. Anyway, I love pockets. The funny thing is, if they make me look too bulky, I might have the cleaner sew them up or cut them out. Once our dear old dog Henry smelled a little pellet of a treat in a pocket of some cotton shorts I had, and he ate the whole pocket. That's how much people love pockets. How could I be mad at him? Number 4, the careers of my exhibits, also known as my children. All of them are launched. My 3, my partner's 1, and the significant others as well. No one really handed them much in the way of help, if any. They are being hired and being promoted, and it's on their talents and their work ethic which is solid, and I am proud of how motivated and smart they are. Number 5, the impeachment. It's not a joyful, great thing for the year. It's a somber and responsible thing we must endure for the good of our democracy. The impeachment is a time for statesmanship, not partisanship. It's a time to end the damage that has been wrought by a corrupt man and his feckless toadies. It is time to prosecute him for his crimes and remind our fellow citizens that any shred of this behavior would have been considered unacceptable in every previous president in the history of our country. If he has nothing to hide, why has he refused to share his tax returns? Why has he refused to allow his senior staff to testify? It makes no sense. Even as a Democrat, I miss the concept of an honorable opponent. I long to see the Republican Party restored to its principles of small government and nice people. This administration has forced some very fine people on both sides into their separate bubbles with their own narrative logic. Trump wants to foment civil war at home and make deals with dictators abroad. Trump must be impeached. It is the only right thing to do. And with that, coming up, Steve Levingston, editor at The Washington Post and author of a new biography of Joe Biden and Barack Obama. We'll be right back. Hi, it's Lisa Birnbach, and this is 5 Things That Make Life Better. Today, my guest is Steve Levingston, an editor for a very long time at The Washington Post. I think that's what we're going to say because 18 years is a long time and a good long time. And the author of the new book, Barack and Joe, The Making of an Extraordinary Partnership. Welcome to the program, Steve.
Oh, great to be here. Thanks.
You have written a really interesting account of the friendship between former President Barack Obama and Vice President Joe Biden, and you wrote it without speaking to President Barack Obama and Vice President Joe Biden. How was that? How did you get it going? How did you keep it going? And how did you have faith that you would get the kind of gritty details of, or not gritty, molecular details of their friendship without them?
Right. Well, it sounds pretty crazy, doesn't it? I mean, no journalist would do that normally, but the way I looked at it, actually, when I tried very hard to get both of them to talk to me. I tried repeatedly, and each time I got different answers for why they wouldn't. But I think what it comes down to is simply that I think they both realized that this campaign was going to be happening of Joe's, and they really didn't want to get into it too much in any way that would come out later in a book that could then be used one way or another by either of them or by the media or whatever. So I think it was just a subject they wanted to steer clear of, sort of a big way, not to affect anything in a way that they might not wanted to at the time, as we see that Barack is sort of not really seeming all that friendly to Joe these days, or Joe may I don't know. It was some weird messages I got, and they decided not to do it. So what I did instead, first I thought, well, maybe I shouldn't do this. And then I thought, well, I like writing history, basically. And in some ways, what I'm looking at is history, very contemporary history. It's a history from, the 8 years that they were in office. It was a few years ago. And so I tried to do it almost like a historian. Like I wrote this book before that, this Kennedy and King, about John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King. And I had to go and just sort of construct their relationship through whatever material was available. The main people aren't there anymore.
So you have done actually, and your book is beautifully sourced, and you have a bibliography and you have notes for each chapter, and you have actually maybe written the first book that will be used by future historians examining them and their relationship.
That's exactly it. And that's exactly how I feel about it. I mean, they talk about journalism being the first rough draft of history.
Yeah.
But this is based on a lot of journalism as well as other things. I did a lot of interviews with people around Barack and Joe.
Right.
I did deep dives into all the material that's out there, memoirs and video and everything that was, online and everything. So I sort of look at this, like you said, it's really like not the first rough draft, but maybe the first draft
right.
of this relationship.
Right. And of course, it's a different book that you wrote that was published in October of 2019 than a book you would write if this election were over by now.
Exactly.
However,
right.
Now they had what was the nature of the Biden Obama connection when they were both serving in the Senate?
Well, they just sort of both arrived. I mean, Obama arrived there where Biden had been for 30 odd years,
right?
And they didn't really hit it off that well when Obama first got there. Obama was the new bright shiny thing of the Democratic Party,
right?
And he wanted to move fast. He thought he was pretty hot, and Biden was an old man of the Senate, and he liked the hierarchy, he liked the traditions, and in some ways, Obama seemed like a bit of a threat, I think, to Biden and the way that he viewed the Senate, and he was such a hot celebrity at the time that Biden wanted him to slow down a little bit.
I guess in the last few months, we've all watched up close, or at least on TV, how the way legislators are seated, how that may connect with how they get along, how we don't know what their office geography is, but the nature of a fellow senator from the same party. Does that mean that they are in each other's face a lot, or can they, can Obama with his quick ambition and Joe Biden with his more discursive style, do they have nothing to do with one another?
No, I think they intersect, certainly, because they're both Democrats and whatnot, and I mean they intersected. Both of them were on the Foreign Relations Committee when Obama first arrived, and Biden was, I think he was chairman or ranking member of that. So in the hierarchy, as you say, where they sit, Obama or Biden was right in the center of the seating arrangement, and there was Obama way at the far end, the last seat off to the
right.
edge. And so that sort of like sums up what you were saying, that the hierarchy does matter,
right,
in a sense. And Obama had to put up with it as much as it sort of maybe rubbed against him.
No one can forget when Biden was asked, when the big group started announcing that they were running for the Democratic nomination. It's hard to forget that Biden referred to Obama as well-spoken and clean or something like that.
Yeah. That, one of his early gaffes with Obama, I guess. He kind of, and Obama tried to be very gracious about it, although he was upset that, Biden was implying that there hadn't been well-spoken African Americans who had run for president before, and there was Jesse Jackson and
right.
Shirley Chisholm.
Right.
But in the end, he sort of like felt that this was Biden's just, again, even then he was an old guy speaking in an old way, and he didn't really mean harm.
It's that trope,
Right.
It gets you into trouble.
Right. This is the way his mama used to talk, about people, and he just sort of was carrying on the tradition in a way. So,
and the move to name Joe Biden as his vice president was a shocker, but I would expect in your world at the Washington Post it was even more shocking.
Well, I don't know. I mean, why do you think people thought it was shocking? I sort of thought that in many ways it made sense for Obama, because Biden had things that Obama needed, and that's how you pick your vice president. He had strength in the Midwest, he had strength in those kind of swing states, which he still does, and he had a lot of foreign affairs experience, which Obama basically had nothing on,
right?
And he needed someone like that, and he needed somebody who could work with Congress. And Biden sure had a lot of friends on both sides of the aisle in Congress. So he sort of fit that mold of the kind of candidate as vice president who would help him not only in the election to get elected, but once he was in, he probably would be a good guy to have next to you when you were trying to run the country.
Well, that's true. I guess it was a yin and a yang. Was there ever a thought that Obama would ask Hillary Clinton to be his vice president?
Well, yeah, he was thinking about that for a while, certainly. I mean, he had others, but I think he came down early on to sort of canceling out Hillary as his vice president, because as I remember reading or hearing people tell me that he felt that he wouldn't be getting, it would be a threesome basically in the White House.
Right.
It would be Hillary, Bill, and Barack, and he didn't want to have to face that.
Yeah, so. I get it. So what happens, of course, is that they become the Lone Ranger and Tonto, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. I mean, they really were emblematic of a great, well, as you've said in the book, or in your the introduction also says, a great buddy picture.
Yeah. I mean, it was clear. I mean, what was interesting about it was that, they had all these tensions leading into it, and even while they were in the White House together. But there was a definite affection there, and there was a definite sort of respect. And as they got to know each other, they sort of relied on each other's strengths to make them better people, which is what exactly you do in a relationship. You want to take the best of whoever you're having your relationship with and make it a little bit of your own. And I think, Obama did that for Biden in some respects, though it may not be obvious. He gave him a sense of discipline. Biden was not a terribly disciplined guy in speaking and other ways. And I think Biden really respected that in Obama and wanted that to be part of his being. And Biden and Obama, who we sort of know is kind of aloof and kind of not terribly an intimate guy, chummy backslapper of a politician, he sort of saw the warmth and compassion that Biden had, and he adopted some of that. So they kind of fed off of each other. And I like to say in some ways, together, they almost made a whole person,
Yes, exactly. And a pretty good looking one at that.
That's true. They looked great together.
They did.
And whatever. I mean, that was part of the appeal too. I mean, all those photos and them, going out and having lunch together and ice cream and, a little golfing on the greens at the White House. I mean, you couldn't fake that stuff. They really did enjoy being around each other, I think.
Well, what's interesting, sorry to interrupt you, but what's interesting is in the George W. Bush era, we started to see men hugging.
Yes.
I think I really started noticing the male hug or the bro hug or whatever it's called these days in force. George W. Bush doing that, and I think he did it, and then it started to be a thing in the country. People who saw, well, if the president can hug a guy, I can hug a guy, and I do think that Americans look to the president and how he behaves and sort of model themselves. He's sort of the father of us all, even if he's younger than we are. And I wonder what you think is the general takeaway from that Joe and Barack Obama relationship.
Yeah, no, they did, they perfected that male hugging stuff, really. I mean, it started, as you said earlier, but they weren't shy about showing their affection. And I think that, as we know, as you said, presidents do and vice presidents do set a model of behavior.
Right.
And, we see it in the White House today. We saw it in the White House then. These guys sort of told not only, men, they did set a standard for male bonding so that it was okay for men to do that sort of thing. But they also just set a standard for general humanity and compassion that emanated from them to the rest of us. And, I think people picked up on that and people wanted a part of that and people saw it. There's one of my favorite sort of little anecdotes in the book is when this one woman read an article about the bromance on a website, and she posted a comment and it had photos and everything. And her comment was just so telling. It sort of tells us how people made this a part of their lives and wanted to be a part of it themselves. She said, "I want a man to look
Look
at
at me.
the way Biden looks at Obama.
Yeah.
I mean, that sort of summed it all up as far as I was concerned. And that's how, people in the White House, men or women in the White House, will sort of affect the rest of the nation.
Yes. I think that's true. I think there was something genuine. We got to know that their family spent time together, that Sasha, I think Obama was very good friends with one of Biden's granddaughters, that they were classmates, had sleepovers,
Yep.
and the wives liked it and respected one another, and it felt real. And, for some reason, we needed to see that.
Yeah. No, it's really
We
important.
needed to see that. And I think also there is something very refreshing when you look back. And when I went through your book, I felt like, oh, right, friendship. That's a nice thing. It's nice to have lunch with a friend. There's sort of that old notion that men don't know how to maintain friendships, and that it's their wives or female partners who make dinner plans and make dinner parties and sort of force the husbands of their friends to play nicely. But there seemed to be nothing forced about this particular twosome.
Exactly. And, there's the great quote that Obama used at the Medal of Freedom ceremony when he gave the Medal of Freedom to Biden right before the end of their term.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about friendship, and he referred to something that was from a Yeats quote, was from a Yeats poem.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes, think where man's glory most begins and ends, and say my glory was, I had such friends. And he was referring directly to Biden. I mean, and for a president to talk about his vice president, for a man to talk about another man like that, it just sort of like sets this incredible model that you would hope we might someday get back to.
Yeah, I feel that way. Do you, Steve, have male friends that you see apart from when you and your wife go out to dinner with other couples?
Yeah, some, but certainly not. I don't think at the level and the intimacy and the standard that these two guys did, and it's kind of sad. And I've thought a lot about that, and I think it gets close, and we have deep conversations and all, but I don't know. You always feel like you could do more, and you could go deeper and be more real with anybody in any relationship. But it's it's something we should all aspire to.
Well, I also think that it's difficult to make a deep, profound, close friend when you're an adult and you have all your history that they don't know and all your baggage that they haven't seen. And it's even more remarkable for that.
Right.
And Barack and Joe, the subtitle says it all, The Making of an Extraordinary Partnership. I wonder your thoughts on the stuttering. We have just learned that Joe Biden has overcome stuttering, and we're meant to understand that some of the gaffes and some of the verbal boo-boos come from that panic that a stutterer feels when they know they're going to say a word that is challenging.
Right. Well, actually, there's a good section in my book that talks about his stuttering when he was a youth and how he fought really hard to overcome it. Mm-hmm. And, he was a great athlete when he was young, and that was partly because he wanted to have people respect him for what he was and what he could do rather than his tongue, which was having trouble at the time. Mm-hmm. And he worked really, really hard to overcome it. And, you're referring probably to that, was it in the Atlantic?
Yes.
Piece recently.
Right.
That was a beautiful piece. And I myself, I'd been thinking about writing a piece just like that, but that guy was perfect to write that piece.
Well, because he was himself a stutterer.
Exactly. Because it was occurring to me, and it was really kind of upsetting me, that a lot of people were jumping on Biden for statements he said that seemed like he was being disrespectful, or he was cutting someone down, or he was just not getting it, or his mind was going when he came out with the wrong word. And to me, it was obvious that, this is what happens when you are a stutterer. You never really lose it, I don't think. And and I've talked to others who had this as well, and they say that what you do, and what I think Joe does, and I think it was mentioned in that article, if you're getting to a point and you're sort of suddenly panicking about getting the right word and you can't get the word out, you go to a safe word.
Right.
And you just say that word, and it may not be the appropriate word, it might not be the right word, it might be a totally wrong word, but you can say it.
Right.
And it happens so quickly that people think that, well, what's going on with that guy's brain? Well,
right.
There's nothing really.
Right.
He's not slow. He's not.
He's overcompensating, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's kind of patently unfair to criticize someone for that kind of, I don't know what you call it, condition.
Right.
Because it's innate. It's something within him.
It's something within the brain that he
right.
can't control.
And it's the same as criticizing anyone else for any other kind of condition that is given to them by God.
Yeah. I guess the problem is that it's invisible for so much of the time that when it happens, people are taken aback.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But then again, Joe Biden, who has evaded some press, and certainly he avoided you during the making of your book, he does make time for people who've undergone hardship like his, like the loss of family, like the stuttering. I mean, he has such empathy.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the gifts he's given us, to show when you're wounded, cry if you're a man. It doesn't make you less of a man. I think that's something that I will always be grateful to him for, and his beautiful relationship with the Republicans. I mean, as we know, one of his best friends was John McCain, and he didn't let party stand in the way of decent friendships. Now, of course, it's hard to believe it was so recently, but when he was vice president, the houses of Congress were not as locked into a disagreeable, hateful silo the way they are now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's to his benefit, and maybe to his disadvantage, that he still believes in being able to cross the aisle.
I know.
I mean, in some ways, it's a beautiful virtue for him to think that way, and for him to think, yes, if I become president, I can work with these people. I can do this. Again, he may be thinking about another time that we've just left behind us, but he also may be looking forward to a newer time where maybe that can happen again. You don't know. And it's kind of an interesting and affirmative way of thinking, in a way.
It's a nice way of thinking. It's affirmative. It's uplifting. It's optimistic. And it's also one of those things that I think gets him in trouble, because people think he's out of it because he looks forward to a kinder America.
Right.
That we have lost.
The other thing is, though, in some ways, what he's kind of promoting is absolutely essential. Because if we don't ever get back to being able to work together, then this is no longer a democracy.
Right, right. It's really an incredible time. And it's incredible that you were able to write this book, Barack and Joe, while you were also editing the nonfiction book reviews at the Washington Post full time.
Yeah.
You make us look like slackers, you know. That's a lot of work.
Or I'm just manic. How about that?
Okay, now I have a couple of book questions for you. This year we've seen so many books about what's going on in the White House, about Trump, by the Trump side and the non-Trump side. We've seen memoirs, because we always see memoirs. What are Americans reading? What do they really want to read? And do Washingtonians want to read more politics than the rest of the country?
I think they probably do. I think we get a skewed view from, that so-called inside the Beltway kind of thing.
Right.
Where they do want to read all of that. And I do think that there's been a glut, and there's going to continue to be a glut of books about Trump and our world and his dysfunction, and we're already seeing that in a way. And this is sort of what happens with publishing, I think. The publishing world jumps on a theme and they buy 1 million books on that theme.
Right.
And then there's really diminishing returns after a while.
Right.
And you see already, I mean, even that big book, by Anonymous that, came out, everyone was so excited about it. They thought it would be the greatest thing. It hasn't really told us anything terribly new. And because he couldn't tell us who he was, he didn't give us really a lot of context. So a lot of that stuff was already out there. It sells and it has been selling well, but it's only because people do have this appetite for that kind of stuff. But I do think there's going to be a time, and there has been a time, with some of the Supreme Court books and the Kavanaugh books,
right,
where, people have moved on and you can't keep writing about that subject perhaps too much.
I feel like Donald Trump and his affiliates have taken up all of our brain. I mean, I do feel for the first time in my life that I think about the president all the time. I should be thinking about my diet. I should be thinking about my kids more. Yeah. I should be thinking about a lot of things. But I'm thinking about Donald Trump.
Yeah, just make sure you don't think about him before you go to sleep at night.
Well, I know. That's the challenge. What about great new nonfiction by a new voice about something totally unrelated to today's politics? Can that book come through? Can someone pay attention to a book that isn't about this moment?
Boy, that's a really good question. And, you don't see it a lot, although, I mean, I guess in terms of, there was a memoir, The Yellow House, that was very popular about a woman in Katrina and her family, and that got a lot of attention and it sold very well, and it was something that removed from our day-to-day politics. So I think it probably talked a little bit about the world in general and the roughness of it. But that became a big seller. It became targeted as the one of the best books of the year on all the lists and whatnot.
Right.
There's an example. But I do think that in some ways, and actually we had an interesting piece in the Post, I think, this weekend about Jack Kerouac's book, On the Road.
Right.
When that first came out, that book only really succeeded, and the whole Beat Generation thing kind of took off by some kind of fluke of a review in the New York Times by a guy who liked the book immensely and was very learned and wrote a very thoughtful review of it, when the main reviewer there was on vacation and hated the book and wasn't going to review it.
Oh, funny.
And after that, it's a great little piece, I think.
I'll look for it.
Looking at. But the reason that, and the piece sort of talks a little bit about, can that happen again today? Because he basically made Kerouac and On the Road and the Beat. And the problem with it today is that, as we all know, the media is just so fractured. And you get so many voices sounding off that no voice really has a tremendous sway in any way anymore. Even the New York Times Book Review does not have the power that it used to have, as much as it likes to think it does. And was that a good little dig?
Yeah, that was good.
But it really doesn't. We've seen examples of that where that they've tried to promote certain novelists, certain books, or whatever, in big ways on the cover of the Sunday Review, and it didn't happen. But in the earlier days, that happened all the time, and I don't think it's so much a function of the Times as it is the New York Times, as it is our Times,
our moment,
and the way the movement is,
the
way the moment is, and the media is. So it's
and
really
there isn't a Michiko Kakutani anymore. Once she stepped down, I don't think there is a book reviewer who means everything.
Yeah,
to a group of readers. But on the other hand, happily, it feels like the book business is in a resurgence. One of my exhibits is reading her head off, and she says it's because she has screen fatigue. And I think after a while, getting back to pages and paper and ideas is very, very, it's wonderful. It's restorative.
Oh, yeah. And it's definitely happening, I think. And an interesting aspect of that is you talk about screen. I know you're talking about computer screens and stuff, but this whole business of online books, people reading their Kindles and that sort of stuff has sort of peaked.
Yeah.
And that's sort of on a downward trend a little bit. And people are going back to paper. They want to feel the paper. They want to have the book. They don't want people to know that I'm reading this book at this moment. You want to be free and easy with what you have in your hand, and it's something separate from the connected world. And I think that's attractive to people nowadays. And, the buying, I think, of paper books, hardcovers and paperback, is doing better than it was.
It feels that way to me. And bookstores are basically filled with customers. And the other thing, Steve, is that it's a great value for your entertainment buck.
Oh, yeah.
It's not 90 minutes in a theater, because movie tickets are now the same price as a paperback.
Oh, I know.
So I'm as you know, I'm a book person, and you are, and I really enjoyed reading Barack and Joe, The Making of an Extraordinary Partnership. And now, Steve Levingston, it's time for your 5 things that make life better. Okay. Number 1, you said archives.
Yes. And that sort of goes back to what we were talking about earlier.
Yes.
In the writing of this book and other books, archives are a beautiful, wonderful thing. And where they exist, you can just gather so much information and get a perspective on history and current day as well, and be able to interpret history by having them. That means presidential libraries, research centers, all that stuff. And what's so great about a lot of them these days is that they're so, I was complaining about the digital world, but having these archives,
they are
digital,
accessible, yeah.
You can sit in your home and, for my earlier book, this one I did on the Belle Epoque in Paris, I could tap into the Paris libraries and research centers sitting in Bethesda, Maryland, and get material out that way.
Right.
So it's just a wonderful thing.
Did you actually have to go to other centers to do research on this book?
On this one?
Yes.
No, I don't know that I did. I did for the Kennedy and King book. I definitely went around and looked in the archives there. But this one, again, it was so digitally available.
And it's so new that everything you were looking for was recent.
Right. And the people I talked to it's a very D.C. book. All the people were in D.C., so I could just go and meet them in their offices and talk to them.
Right.
So,
right.
Or,
Number 2, indexes.
That's related to.
Yes.
As you try to research anything, I'm probably giving away a terrible bad secret, but indexes in books are so valuable, it's beyond belief. If you're working on a subject and you're looking for a certain part of that subject or something specific, I just live a lot of time in indexes. The first thing I go to whenever I get a book or I get a book out of the library, if I'm doing research, I spend all my time in the index, because it helps you and makes things a lot quicker too.
And a little note from a book reviewer: if a book has an index, it's so much easier to write the review. That's all I'm saying. But yes. I write the pages in my bound galleys when I write reviews for you.
Yeah.
But anyway, yes, indexes are lifesavers. Number 3, I have to say, this one was a shock. Squirrels?
You and the rest of my family, and my daughter in particular, and my son. I love squirrels. I think they make life better. They just have to be. To my mind, squirrels are nature's comedians. If you sit and watch them, and I sit and watch them outside my window in our house, in our backyard, maybe too much, they are amazing creatures. They can walk straight up and down the trunk of a tree. This is something I dream of doing, and they can only do that because they have this weird physical thing where they can turn their back foot all the way around, which is kind of amazing. They have amazing abilities that we didn't realize. Their eyes have yellow tinted lenses to cut down on sun glare. They're amazingly successful creatures for many reasons.
Wow.
And when they're burying their nuts, I'm going on too much here. No. When they bury their nuts, they bury them all in the yard.
Yes.
They're so smart that sometimes if they see another squirrel looking at them, they'll decoy and they'll pretend to bury the nut there, but they won't do it, and they'll move to another spot and bury it in another place.
Is it
Love
possible that you have some of the finest squirrels in your yard? Because when I see squirrels, I've seen feral squirrels that scare me. I've seen dirty-looking squirrels. I thought they were carriers of.
Well, you're a city woman, right?
Yes, I'm a city woman.
And they're city squirrels. It's a whole different world out
They're
here.
tough. Maybe yours are kind of nice Mensa squirrels.
Yeah. No, actually, they are pretty tough though sometimes. And you can see who are the alpha ones, and they're chasing each other around and running in circles up the tree trunk and stuff. It's just great sort of release and, getting away from day-to-day life, watching, that little corner of nature.
That's nice. Okay, I get it now. Cheers, the TV show. Number 4 for you.
This is sort of related too. These days, we need things that take us away from the real world that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife and I have gotten into this habit of every night before we go to sleep, we put on an episode of Cheers, which is available on Netflix. All whatever years it is, I don't know how many years we've already gone through the entire series once, and we're up to like the seventh season again. And it's such simple. Some people would say that it's a little bit archaic, which it is, and it may not be the best in terms of Me Too, the way that they, Sam Malone, the main guy there, talks about women and always wants just to get a woman and all that kind of stuff. But it's very innocent, simple stuff. And the writing is just so humorous sometimes. And each one of those episodes is a little play in itself. And I love theater. So each one of those is like a self-contained theater show you go to for a half hour every night. And you come away, some of them are better than others, and some of them are brilliant.
I appreciate what you're saying. And so many people I know have adopted a sitcom in reruns to be part of, I think it's called their sleep hygiene.
Yes.
And I know a lot of people watch Parks and Recreation.
Mm-hmm.
The millennials seem to watch The Office over and over and over and over again. But I think it's all the same. It's comfort food. It's
Exactly.
It's chicken soup for the soul.
We also do 30 Rock, which is quite good for this.
Oh, yes.
That's really fun sometimes, but it's a little more intense than Cheers. Cheers is a softer thing.
And Cheers was so well written.
Yeah.
And it was character driven.
It was. And
Which
there's some real brilliant writing in there. If those guys that were writing for the stage, our theater life would have been much more vibrant during those years.
Yeah, that's true. And number 5, 2 pens in your pocket.
Yeah, that's going to sound a little nerdy, but this is my pants pocket, not a shirt pocket like a nerd, but my pants pocket. I usually have a pad of paper with me, a notebook with me all the time, just because I always get things I have to write down. And I'm always worried that I won't have a pen. So I always have to have a pen. But it's not good enough to have one pen because I worry that pen might not have ink in it or might run out of ink. So I have to have 2 pens in my pocket.
I totally get you.
I'm always carrying the 2 pens in my pocket, and I've got them right now. I can feel them down there. And when I feel them, I feel like I'm balanced in a way. If I'm walking around and I just sort of remind myself, okay, they're there, I feel like I'm centered, I'm balanced, I know everything's okay.
Well,
so that makes life better.
Yeah, it does make life better. I get it. I don't go out of my house without paper. I just can't. And that would include, I carry around a mechanical pencil usually.
Yeah.
But it's the tools of the trade, right?
Exactly. And you just never know when something's going to occur to you, and you just don't want to lose it because you'll lose it because 10 minutes later you'll be doing something else.
Yeah, I'm all for the analog when it comes to writing and creating. Well, Steve, it was fantastic talking to you. Again, the book is called Barack and Joe, The Making of an Extraordinary Partnership. It's published by Hachette, and it is a kind of reassuring buddy experience reading the book. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. It was great. Always great talking with you.
You've been listening to 5 Things That Make Life Better with me, Lisa Birnbach. My guest this week has been journalist Steve Levingston. He is the nonfiction book editor at The Washington Post and author of Barack and Joe, The Making of an Extraordinary Partnership. You can follow Steve on Twitter at Steve Levingston. You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play Music, YouTube, and iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. My blog is at lisabirnbach.com, where you'll find links and photos to all the things we discussed today. This podcast is produced in New York City by thefieldtv.com. My engineer is Jimmy Regan. My team is Espresso Rucci, Michael Port, Boko Haft, and Sam Haft. Until next week, stay warm and act natural. Bye-bye.
That was 5 Things with Lisa Birnbach. New episodes every Friday, if she remembers.